My name is Jeff. If we haven't met before, pleasure to meet you in this way, and I'll be giving this morning's message. I guess Mark clipped another one of his coupons with me, and then he went and ran away this week. He's not even here, but that's just fine. Well, we're getting into it this morning. Looking forward to a great time this morning, and just as we get started, a couple of things. You've heard us mention that we've hired a new staff member. Her name is Robin Elliott, and Robin and Steve are here with us this morning. They're sitting over in this section over here, and you're going to want to get to know them. Yeah. Man, so much going on in the church that I just couldn't even come for yesterday's fall cleanup day. Too many things on the go, but Robin said, don't worry, Steve and I will be here. We'll be your stand-ins. So here they were yesterday, and really appreciate that. They're off to a great start in our community as just members like you all are, just members of our community, people involved here. And Robin has the role of pastor of spiritual growth and leadership development, and we're so looking forward to her ministry here. You heard about the partners meeting that's coming this Wednesday night. It's going to be a busy night. Thursday night, the very next night, there's a missions team meeting that you can come and hear about some of the mission projects that are going out from Lakeside in 2020. But let's get started with this morning. Have you ever had this experience before? You wanted an authentic Mexican-made taco with freshly made corn shells, not those cheap El Paso things that you get at the grocery store that when you open them, they taste like they've been in that package for about 4 years and they taste a bit like leather or cardboard or something like that. I'm talking about a real Mexican-made taco. Fresh meat, all the right spices, fresh-made guacamole, hot sauce, but instead you were kind of in a rush, so you just went to Taco Bell. You wanted to get a fresh brewed cup of coffee. You know, one of those awesome ones where first you hear the beans getting ground by your favorite barista. You got the espresso shot coming down into the cup of coffee. And then the artist took over, put that nice frothed milk on the top with a pattern in the top. You know, one of those cups of coffees. But you didn't have the time, so instead you just grabbed some Maxwell House swill that came through the $20 Proctor Silex drip machine. And it's coffee, but it's not really coffee. You wanted to go to a place that would give you a designer breakfast, maybe a place like Etc. or a place like Cora's. You know where you pay $15 for a breakfast instead of $5? You wanted to go to a place like that, but you were in a hurry, so you just went through the drive-thru and got a McMuffin instead. Ooh. You were dying for a hamburger, not a Beyond Meat burger, not an Impossible burger, but a real 100% all beef burger made on the grill with fried onions, melted brie cheese, crisp lettuce so crisp that it breaks instead of bends. You know, like the way they do on the TV commercials? But instead you were kind of pressed for time, so you just went down to Harvey's and said, go ahead and make your hamburger a beautiful thing. It reminds me of an old marketing campaign, and every time I say the word old, Mark will say to me something along the lines of, I wasn't born yet. But it's okay, because we have another resident who can relate to this. The only person in town that I know of that still listens to cassette tapes, and that's Mayor Cam Guthrie. Yes. So anyway, but do you remember this one? Is it live or is it Memorex? The idea that this cassette tape is so good, it'll make you feel that you were right there when the musician was playing live. You kind of get the idea of these types of things that we do, the substitute for the real. There is, however, one exception, one place where you should never take a substitute instead of the real, and that is the mighty hot dog. The mighty hot dog. That is a food creation that should never be substituted, but if you really want to have a hot dog and enjoy it in all its glory, you need one of these. I don't know if you can see this from the back, so let's go to Ultra Zoom here at Lakeside. Ultra Zoom. There you go. 2 slots. There you go. 2 slots for the hot dogs, 2 slots for the bun. So let me just give you a little demonstration here. I'm sorry, somebody said that we should have fans blowing this morning just to bring this here, but here's what you do. You take the bun, you put the bun in the side, you put the other bun in the other side, take 2 of those all pork, high quality hot dogs, put those right in there, And let's see. We plug the toaster in, and away we go. And there is the hot dog, like you've never seen it before. And these toasters will be on sale at the Lakeside store. But they're only going to be available on April 1st, the same day that valet parking and other things will be available. And some of you remember what that was like on that day when you had to come and speak with me about some of those things. But life is like that, isn't it? Life is like that. You want the real thing, but you settle for the substitute. It's starting to come. You settle for the substitute. Funny though, it's kind of the same way with faith, isn't it? We want something great, something transcendent, something that's just beyond us. Something like a pastor friend of mine says, we want to touch heaven. But instead we feel like our feet are firmly planted on earth and we settle for some kind of substitute. And today it's all about distinguishing what's real and what's substitute. We want the real thing because this is where some of us truly get tripped up. We keep an arm's length relationship with the church, don't we? Can you relate to that? We keep an arm's length relationship. The essentials of the faith seem to be unclear. They're debated, certainly. The essentials seem to be locked in a culture that no longer exists in our day and age. They seem to be out of touch with the realities of today, kind of controversial, maybe even backwards, some of us would say, or otherwise just too much. And so we kind of keep the church out here. We kind of keep the faith out here. And we get tripped up over that, over the whole thing of what's real and what's a substitute. If you're new to faith or you're one of those people who's come this morning and you said, I'm just checking it out. I'm not even sure if I believe all this. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with all the beliefs that the church has. Maybe you walked away from faith a long time ago and you've just kind of come back and you said, maybe I should recheck this out. Maybe there are circumstances in your life that have brought you here today, either at the invitation of someone else or a struggle that you're having and you're just wanting to re-explore this faith, but you're not sure because you're always concerned about this list of do's and do-nots. You know, things like, hey, Sunday is important. You should probably make Sunday a priority. Definitely don't get involved in playing hockey on Sunday. Definitely come to church most Sundays. Don't go to the beach in the summertime on a beautiful, pristine, glorious day. I'm not bitter about that at all. Or definitely don't sleep in. Stay away from certain kinds of establishments. The trouble with that one is, of course, the list of establishments that you're supposed to stay away from seems to change over time. Read your Bible literally, and follow everything in it. Give a percentage of your money, more if possible, to the church. Go to some kind of a group in the midweek. The list goes on. Oh, it's ready. Right there. That's perfect. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the toppings, so I'll just have to leave that there for now. But anyway, there is the mighty hot dog. Yeah, let's just take that down so I don't have to think about that anymore. All right. Yeah, so if you're a Jesus follower, you too can relate to that, even if you've been a believer in the faith for a long time, this list of do's and do-nots. And it makes you ask the question, is that the real thing? And when I think about questions like what's real, what's right, what are we supposed to follow, what's the essential, what's extra, I like to go to the source. And I think of the source as Jesus. I like to see what did Jesus have to say about what was really essential. And I hope that today you'll find that some of the categories that you might hold in your hands when you think about the faith, I hope that you'll find that some of those categories start to get broken down a little bit. So to speak about this, I want to go back to a story that's found in one of the accounts of Jesus' life. It's the book of Mark, one of the 4 eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus. And if you were here during the summer months, you might remember we went all the way through every chapter of Mark, and we had our preachers and teachers speaking about the stories and encounters that Jesus had along the way. And in Mark 5, one of those encounters happened. It kind of went like this. Jesus and his followers got into a boat and sailed across to what was called the other side. And when they got to the other side, a place that no good Jewish boy should really be finding himself in, they land at the other side and they encounter a wild man. And the scriptures tell us that in this encounter when they got there, this guy lives among the graves. This guy yells and screams night and day. This guy has tried to be bound with chains, hand and foot, but seems to have a miraculous source of strength and breaks the chains off of his hands and feet and cannot be contained. It is said in that particular passage that he's possessed by an evil spirit. Now, that's a whole topic for another day. We're not going to cover that today, but just put that to the side for the moment. But here is this wild man. Jesus encounters this guy as soon as he steps out of the boat. Jesus has an encounter with this man, and he commands the evil spirits to leave this man and sends them into a herd of 2,000 pigs who promptly rush off the cliff and into the lake and are said to have drowned. And that's where I lose some of you, because that's one of those stories that's just too much. That story is just too much. It's the kind of story that causes you grief. First off, we're talking about demon possession, and that just brings up all kinds of memories of a movie that once was called The Exorcist, and that was a very painful experience watching that movie, as some of you might remember. And it's definitely an anti-animal human rights story, isn't it? I mean, remember that time in the summer? It was kind of funny if you were here when we went through Mark chapter 5, and there was some discussion back and forth between Mark, who was preaching the message, and a member that was out here and saying how much a pound of pork cost and how that all happened. Yeah, that was kind of funny. Anyway, it wasn't so funny today, but let's move right along. But it's an anti-animal human rights story, an anti-animal rights story. And that is a topic for another day. But when you see unusual stories in the Bible, you want to press in. You want to say, what's going on? Because usually there's more going on than you think. So hold that thought and let's see what happened next. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, a region of 10 towns, how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. From Mark chapter 5. No prayer, no church, no books, no school, no follow-up, no forms filled out, no money exchanged, no commands to observe special days of the week, no religious practices discussed whatsoever. Did you get his name? Well, what was the name of the guy? Because we need his name and his email address so we can follow up on him. No name. You read the scriptural account, it just says a man. There's no record of who he was. There was, however, a mind-blowing, powerful, life-changing encounter between Jesus and this man. Can you imagine? He goes away into the Decapolis, this region of 10 towns, and he starts telling about what Jesus had done for him. We don't have record of exactly who he spoke to or what he said or how it was received, but I kind of imagine how that went. Aren't you that wild man? The guy who couldn't be bound with chains, hand and foot? Well, what happened? He says, I don't know. This guy just cast these demons out of me. Well, where did he go next? I don't know. What did he tell you what to do next? I don't know. Did he give you any literature? No. Did he invite you to anything else? No. Often Jesus would be challenged in situations like this. In this particular case, the scripture records that the people were so terrified by this whole experience of the pigs rushing off the cliff, they begged him to leave their region. On other times, Jesus would be criticized. You did something on the wrong day of the week. You shouldn't have done that. You didn't fast when we fasted. You didn't wash your hands correctly before you eat. You behaved poorly a few times in the synagogue and a few other places that I can remember. And worst of all, you were seen in the home of a sinner. Isn't that just the worst? Seen in the home of a sinner? Oh my goodness. Well, what did Jesus say when he was challenged about being in the home of a sinner? He says, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick. And I've come to bring health and healing and wholeness to people. And religious people hate it when you break the rules. And that's why some of you've kind of tapped out of the faith over time. You didn't believe right, you didn't act right, you didn't show up right, whatever it was, and so you kind of tapped out. One time there was this group of people that approached Jesus and they asked him this question: "Are you the one that was to come, or should we expect someone else?" Here's how Jesus replied: "The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor." And Jesus introduces us to the paradigm of encounter, not the paradigm of rules to follow for permission of admission. It's the paradigm of encounter. And the real thing is to encounter the one who said, "I'm the resurrection and the life. I'm God in the flesh." The one who raised the dead to life, the one who healed any sickness that came his way, the one who turned the religious establishment on its head and said, "Follow me." That's who we want to encounter. And this adding of rules and adding of religious practices, it's not just a now thing, it was a back then thing too. We're going to look this morning, let's just begin to look at one of those places where people tried to add rules to what the Christian faith was going to be all about. And we're going to look into the book of Acts. Acts is the book in the New Testament that follows the 4 accounts of Jesus' life, and it's the Acts of the Apostles, those early things that took place in those first few years after Jesus. Let's begin to look at this occurrence. It's Acts chapter 11. We're introduced to a city here called Antioch. Now, those who'd been scattered by the persecution that broke out when Stephen was killed traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, spreading the word only among Jews. Some of them, however, men from Cyprus and Cyrene, went to Antioch and began to speak to Greeks also, telling them the good news about the Lord Jesus. The Lord's hand was with them, and a great number of people believed and turned to the Lord. Antioch was an important city along the Mediterranean coast, one of those places where things occurred in the book of Acts. It was a place where new believers were coming to know Jesus when these other believers had spread to that region and shared the message of Jesus. Well, here's what happened as that church got started and got going. Certain people came down from Judea to Antioch and were teaching the believers, unless you're circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses, you cannot be saved. This brought Paul and Barnabas into sharp dispute and debate with them. So Paul and Barnabas were appointed along with some other believers to go up to Jerusalem to see the apostles and elders about that question. And you know that trouble is brewing when you have to go and see the elders. I actually do appreciate our elders, and sometimes I do have to go up and see them in Jerusalem too. But anyway, these guys come down and they say, "You've got to be circumcised. Can't you just see?" Whoa, hold on a second. We have rules for this kind of thing. You can't just join the faith just like that. We have certain protocols, certain practices, and you've got to follow those. We have a statement of faith after all, and there's certain things on that need to be believed and practiced, and one of those is circumcision. Yes, that's circumcision. Circumcision was the issue of the day. And if you were to go all the way back to the first book in the Bible, the book of Genesis, there was the account of a man named Abraham at that point who God called, revealed himself to Abraham and called him to follow him. And as a sign of this promise that God made to Abraham, he said, "Here's a sign. You need to circumcise yourself, and here on after, everybody that follows after you, every male on the 8th day that's born in your household, needs to be circumcised, and this will be a sign of this promise that I'm making to you." It's kind of a weird thing to think about in this day. We don't really talk about circumcision. The other day I was talking with one of our staff members about circumcision. That's the kind of things we talk about around here. Talking about circumcision. And they said it's kind of a weird one, isn't it? Because how could you check? Anyway, Anyway, it's just one of those things we talked about. Yeah. So anyway, the sign of circumcision. And these guys say it's not necessary. It's not necessary that the Gentiles, these non-Jewish people who are coming to faith, they don't need to be circumcised. And there was such a hubbub about it, Paul and Barnabas had to go up to Jerusalem and see the elders. This was so absolutely controversial, so absolutely radical to say that circumcision was no longer required. It's the kind of thing that results in emails, phone calls, and people leaving the church. Here's the result. This is Peter speaking, Peter being in Jerusalem and part of that elder group. He said, "It's my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood." No mention of circumcision. Just these 4 things would be required. When they actually wrote the letter and sent it off, you find this if you read a little bit further in this chapter. It says, just do these 4 things and then farewell. Good luck. That's all that's required. Nothing else. And I love that sense of beauty that's in that. That sense of we don't want to make it difficult for people who are encountering Jesus. And may we be that kind of church that's always looking to make it easy for people to encounter Jesus. May we not be the kind of place that makes it difficult for people. And you say, yes, but make sure, Jeff, that they understand this and that. And please don't abandon this and that. And friends, let's be the kind of place that can wrestle with this and that. Wrestle with what do the scriptures say about any given thing? What are the things that we have to be saying are essentials? But let's never miss this principle of not making it difficult for people to encounter Jesus. Let's not erect barriers that don't need to be erected that keep people from encountering Jesus. And so if it's all about encounter, then we might just return to that question and say, well, what are the essentials? What are the essentials? You might have seen something like this before in your past. The 4 spiritual laws. It's going to go up on the side screen. This seems like a giant thing, but it's actually just a little tiny booklet. It's called the 4 spiritual laws. And I spent 19 years of my life working in an organization that trained people on how to share this booklet. And when I was a university student down in London, I learned how to share this booklet. They said these were the essentials of the Christian life. And there's 4 points in there, the 4 laws, that God loves you and offers a wonderful plan for your life, that you're a sinful person separated from God, that Jesus died on the cross to pay the penalty for your sins, and that you need to receive Christ as your Savior. That simple message I shared hundreds and hundreds of times. I remember one time I had a roommate and we didn't really know each other that well. We moved into this basement apartment just a few streets away from Western down in London. And I had just learned how to share this booklet, and I thought, I ought to probably share this with my roommate. He doesn't even know what I believe, who I am, what I think. And so I said, I just learned to share this little booklet, just like that one that was on the screen. Can I read through this with you? There was I just read through it from one end of it to the other. I said, do you want to receive Christ? He said, yes, I do. He prayed to receive Christ, invited Christ into his life. Years on down the road, that guy's a successful businessman in London. He's become a Christian. His whole family have become Christians, and his life was changed by that simple process. I shared that little booklet with my dad. I just read through it with him one day. I've shared it on the streets in Canada. I've shared it in classrooms. I've shared it internationally. And millions of people have responded to a simple presentation like that. It's a packaged approach. I mean, it's a booklet, and you read the next page. First law, second law, third law, and fourth law. And what's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that. Nothing at all is wrong with that. But here's what I've noticed. It's possible to accept the message and miss the encounter. It's possible to accept the message and miss the encounter. And let's not miss that this morning. We've all seen that. People who have checked the form, people who prayed the prayer, people who went to the follow-up class, people who got started in a very sincere and good way, And yet there seemed to be no evidence of any life change, and people left the faith not long afterwards saying, I guess it didn't work, I guess it's not for me, I guess it's too much. What does it all amount to? Some kind of dry bones faith experience, if you could even use the word experience. Let's take another lesson from the book of Jesus. We started off with this paradigm of encounter, not the paradigm of rules. Let's go back to see what else Jesus would have us learn about this. And for this, I just want to introduce and briefly explain the system of education that was current in the day. And this was the system of education where rabbis taught in the school system. Rabbis started teaching kids at the age of 5, brought them up through that first level of schooling. And the content of that schooling was all around learning the Old Testament Torah, learning to write it, learning to memorize it, learning to understand it. And as schooling would go on, as kids would reach the age of 13, some of the brightest ones would continue on learning more, understanding what the rabbis were saying about this particular portion of the Torah, understanding what the interpretation was, understanding how they could live their life in a way that was obedient to God. Around the age of 30, a person could actually become a rabbi if they had progressed that far. But before that, people that really were keen on doing this would apprentice themselves to a particular rabbi and say, I'm your student, I'm your disciple. I want to learn what you think. I want to know what you know. I want to see how you live. I want to see how you understand and interpret the Torah. A person who apprenticed themselves to one of those rabbis was said to be taking on the yoke of that rabbi, learning the ways of that rabbi, and learning to live their life in accord with the way that that particular rabbi thought things ought to be. And Jesus grew up in this tradition, and that's why he says this. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. We discover in the scriptures that Jesus was often was called by the title of rabbi by people around him. And this was Jesus saying, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And Jesus invited people to take his yoke upon them, to take his yoke, to become like him, to learn to see the world as he saw them. It's to apprentice oneself to the rabbi, Jesus, to follow him, become like him, and teach others to do the same. And friends, that's what we're trying to emphasize here at Lakeside when we say our vision is to help people discover and fully follow Jesus. We're trying to help people to take on the yoke of the rabbi, to learn the ways of Jesus and begin to learn to live his ways. When you discover and begin to follow Jesus, you begin to understand his word. You begin to understand what he thought, how he lived, what he said. You begin to hear that voice coming through his word and instructing you, this is the way to encounter me. This is the way to live. And you discover how he's uniquely called and gifted you. And I get kind of excited about that. I get excited about encountering Jesus and about apprenticing myself to him. Don't you want to see much more of that happen around here at Lakeside? That we would be a culture of people who apprentice ourselves to Jesus, who get mentored by Jesus, who learn his ways, and then just give it away to others at every level in the church, at all volunteer opportunities, at our staff levels. We want to encourage a culture of development, of mentoring, of apprenticeship, of empowering men and women to be released to be who God has made them to be, both inside and outside the church. We just did that with one of our own great people. And over the last few weeks, if you've been attending here, you've seen that we commissioned Daniel Bell. He came into our church as our youth pastor, or one of our youth pastors back in that day, grew here, learned here, deepened his ability to teach and lead others here. And then we saw that he had the calling on his life to be the next site pastor for our downtown church, Lakeside Downtown. And he's down there right now. Daniel phoned me the other day, I think it was Friday or Thursday, and he's like, hey, Jeff, I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about that. I just went here. I just did that. And I'm like, you go. Go for it. He's doing fantastic, and we released him to that as we will release all of you to what God has uniquely called and gifted you to do. It's not a package or a formula. It's about relationship, not about rules. It's about proximity, not performance. Proximity to Jesus, just drawing closer to him, discovering and fully following him. It's about a new way of living and not a package set of instructions. And that's why we never start a conversation around here with a list of the 100 things you shouldn't do. We invite you on a journey to discover and fully follow. It's why when I get an email, and I do get emails like this sometimes, go ahead. Keep sending them, that's fine. But it's why when I get an email saying, what is your position on this? What's your position on that? I need to know. I never start those conversations with a return email to say, fine, you want the position? Here it is. I invite people into a conversation. Let's talk about this. Let's understand what we think about this and why. Let's apprentice ourselves to Jesus and learn what it's all about. And so you're here today. You might be a person that's been participating in Alpha this fall. We're a few weeks into it. You might be in Alpha, or you might be someone who's here and you're just asking, what's next? What's this encounter all about? You're taking steps, but you're still kind of keeping things out here at arm's length. And you're doing that because you're concerned, but what if this and what if that? I wonder if they're for this. I wonder if they're against that. I wonder if my lifestyle will get kind of cramped and conservative if I go any further down this road. I live with my boyfriend. Is that a no-no? I don't believe everything I've read in the Bible. Is that going to be a problem? And you wonder what's your next step when you're in that place. And I want to encourage you just today to recognize this. You've already taken a next step. You're here. You've already taken a next step. And this is what Jesus invites you to do. Follow me. Just follow him. Just begin taking steps forward in your encounter with him and just let him lead you and follow him. And you say, well, that's great. It sounds kind of, in my head, I understand that. But what are some of the practical steps of making that happen? Let me just describe a couple of those. And while I do that, can I just invite the band to come and join me back on stage? Some of those practical next steps. The first one is just prayer. You might be a person who's here this morning. You've never had somebody pray for you. You can't remember a time, if there even was a time, when you actually made a conscious decision and prayed any kind of a prayer where you acknowledged that you needed Jesus. If you haven't done that, maybe you just need to come forward this morning. You'll see that some of our prayer ministry people will be here at the front. They're here every week, by the way. If it doesn't work for you today, do it next week or another week. But come forward. I remember when I was a young person just encountering Jesus. Thank you. I was invited to come forward just like we do invite you week by week. I was sitting there in my chair. I didn't even know what I should come forward with. I couldn't identify a single thing, but I just felt something drawing me forward. If that's you this morning, just come forward and just say to the person up here at the front, I don't even know why I'm here or what I need prayer for, but please pray for me and with me. Secondly, get a Bible. If you don't have a Bible, come and talk to me, talk to one of our staff, talk to the Next Steps booth out in the atrium and say, I need a Bible. Just begin to read these stories of encounter, these stories of Jesus, those 4 books of the Bible that I mentioned, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read those and look for every place that Jesus had an encounter with someone and say, how did he interact with people? What can I learn from that? How can I apprentice myself to Jesus, my master, my rabbi? Start looking for that. Even if you're a longtime follower of Jesus, it wouldn't hurt to go back and reread some of those things over again. And then get together with a few others. Just discuss it. Share life with people, with a few others. If you're not sure how to do that, out in our atrium is that Next Steps booth. We're calling it the Next Steps booth because we want people to take next steps. So go out there and learn what a next step could be for you. And let's just have our band lead us this morning. But as we do, you guys can just begin playing in behind us. We're going to transition to communion this morning. We're going to enjoy communion together, and you've probably noticed these tables up at the front and in the middle aisle. We're going to have communion. And as I saw that it was a communion Sunday for Lakeside and that I'd be leading communion, I thought, Oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to talk about all the things that it's not about rules and practices, and then we're going to do one of them. And you just say, well, why? Do we just throw that out the window and now we just go back to life as normal? Let's just do our religious practices. Let's do the communion religious practice. Can I encourage us to think of this a little bit differently this morning? Can I encourage us to think of communion as not just another religious practice, not just a part of the package of rules and things we're supposed to do once a month because that's just what we do and that's what we've always done? Can I encourage us to see communion as an invitation from Jesus to a meal? Imagine it's a Friday night. You finished your work for the week. Jesus has invited you over to his place. You're sitting around. You just enjoyed a wonderful meal together. You just marvel at the words that come from this guy, the teaching that has incredible authority and power, and you feel just drawn to this teacher, this incredible Messiah. You feel drawn to him, and what a privilege, you say, to be at his table enjoying this meal. And then he picks up this bread and he breaks it. And he says, "This is my body. It's broken for you. Take and eat this." And then he takes a cup of wine that was already on the table, very likely, and he says, "This is my blood, shed for you for the forgiveness of sins. Drink this in remembrance of me. Encounter me," he says. No longer is the faith going to be defined by membership in an ethnic race called the Jewish people. No longer is the faith going to be defined by whether you've been circumcised or not, and that doesn't even include women. I don't even know how they did that back in the day. But Jesus said, it's about encountering me, and he invites us into that, and he did with his followers that day when this happened at the meal. Encounter him this morning. That song, "Open Up My Eyes in Wonder." That's what I want to be like, opening my eyes. Jesus, I want to encounter you this morning. That word's a big word around here. It's up there on the side of the stage. Encounter. It's one of our core values. At Lakeside, everyone can encounter God, and that's our prayer and our hope for you. If you feel like I'm a person who's accepted the message but missed the encounter, come on forward. Let's deal with that today. You say to yourself, but I got 1,000 questions. You didn't cover this and you didn't cover that. No, I didn't. But keep coming back. Keep walking with Jesus, and do that here. We're going to launch a new series next week. It's all about a church in the biblical times that dealt with difficulties and said, I got a lot of questions about that. And what did God have to say about that? It's the series Overwhelmed, because sometimes life feels like that, overwhelming. So keep coming back. We're going to walk together through that. Have a fantastic week, everybody.